Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is part two of a riveting conversation that we've had with Dr. Yolanda Abel to extend some of the ideas around father engagement in schools. Good afternoon again, Dr. Abel.
Thank you for having me back.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. So we've taken some questions from the Facebook Live post and some kind of community questions that we also collected throughout the entire week since we last saw each other. And so I just want to posit some of these questions to you this afternoon. I'm going to kick us off and just ask you, what role do you believe self-disclosure between parents and teachers play in levels of involvement specific to schools?
Self-disclosure has its place, but we have caveats, obviously, in terms of what you tell or don't tell. Schools, for the most part, already collect some information when a child enrolls in school, who lives in the house, income, things of that nature. Ideally, teachers are also collecting some information as a child comes into his or her classroom, again, around who lives in the house, interests, skills, things we might need to know. So on some levels, that's where we start in terms of self-disclosure and what we know and how we know. The way the question has been worded, I'm not certain exactly what we want to self-disclose. So there are some things that might be more sensitive. When we had our Facebook Live event last week, we got into the concept of incarcerated parents and parents who might not be eligible to come into a city school building by virtue of their parole or probation status as an official volunteer, things of that nature. They can be a little bit more sensitive to self-disclose if we're talking about things like that.
Right.
But there's a safety issue there because, again, if someone's going to be in the building around children, they need to be able to meet our criteria of safety through fingerprinting and things of that nature. So there's a time and place for that if that's what we're trying to do. But if there's no reason for a parent, be it mom or dad, to come to school and tell a teacher or an administrator something, then I don't believe that that should happen. I also don't think it's something that you do the very first time you meet someone. Think about your own comfort level in regards to what do you tell and share, things of that nature. Now, having said that, there may be things that you do need to self-disclose in so much it has some impact on how the teacher will interact with you. For sake of discussion, if you're a dad in a same-sex relationship, so the teacher may need to know that. So she knows that it's dad and dad at home and not dad at mom in regards to how she talks to the child, how she addresses the messages. So it really is dependent on the information that needs to be self-disclosed.
Another question that we got pretty adamantly, especially when I think about some of the disaggregated data that we've collected throughout this entire week, is the idea of competing priorities. So when you think about student safety and mental health and student behavior and student academics, there's a lot of competing priorities that a teacher or school have to navigate. So I guess the basal level of this question is this: how can schools and families find a common ground with all these competing priorities?
I don't know if we will find them with the priorities. I think the common ground is around the child, and that ideally both the child's family and the school want what's best for the child. Now, having said that, how we define what's best can be different. So in so much that I think if we keep that central idea, then it's a conversation of how are we all doing something that supports the overall child. So maybe there's something that happens at home that might not happen at school. There's something that happens at school that might not happen at home. Many years ago, I was teaching a class, parent engagement, and a student who taught here in Baltimore City, who was a white woman, asked the question in class, and her question was, how do I usurp this child's parents? So I probed to find out if there was some legal, abuse, neglect type thing going on, because that becomes a different, scenario and situation. And in essence, she being the teacher, was promoting a message of going to college, and the child's family was primarily promoting a message of you need to graduate from high school and get a job. So first and foremost, I said, well, I don't think you usurp the parent. So in the sense that, they want different things, but I think both of them would have said, we want what's best. So I told a story of a friend of mine who is from Baltimore originally, high school of city schools, so on and so forth. And when he graduated high school, he needed to get a job. That's just kind of the circumstance of his family structure, this, that, and the other. So we did that. And he worked full time. He had his own apartment, car, so on and so forth. But he also sent himself to college. And he earned an IT degree. So it doesn't have to be either
or, right.
It's just kind of the pathway. And we talked a little bit about that again in the Facebook Live when I talked about my friend who took 14 years to earn a college degree. If the end goal is to have a college degree, he did earn it. His pathway was just different than the traditional 4-year. So I think that's how you find that common ground in regards to what's best for the student. And it might be a variety of things that needs to happen to get a student to a goal. It's not A pathway or B pathway. It might be some combination of the two, or maybe something totally different altogether.
I like how you created like a really good dichotomy to that answer. I think it's really important that teachers don't create like these like suppositions on parents about like, this is the better way and I know best, especially when parents have been with this kid for like 18 years. How do you encourage parents to navigate those difficult conversations with teachers? Like, how do you make sure that parents understand that they have not necessarily like an ultimate control, but a best interest at heart? Like, how do you convey that as a parent to a teacher?
On some levels, that depends on the parent and the parent's comfort level. As you well know, lots of our parents, for a variety of reasons, aren't comfortable in coming to our schools.
Right.
They might not feel welcome because of previous experiences, messages they might have received around their child about the child's behavior, poor grades, so on and so forth. So to some extent, we have to mediate that and say you're welcome. And specifically, like we talked about in the Facebook Live event last week, for fathers, how are we letting men know that they are welcome in the building? What's the signage, the posters, kind of how we message? Do we ask? Do we have invitations that are particularly for them? So that's kind of one hand of that. The other is then the parent and how the parent is interacting with other parents and kind of getting that support and that what to say. Because as you know, as a former classroom teacher yourself, sometimes as parents, we don't always message things in the way that teachers in schools would like.
That's right.
So kind of a little bit of coaching of how you share, how you approach. And the school can take a proactive role in that too in regards to sending information home that talks about how do you ask a teacher about how your child is doing academically or socially or whatever your issue or concern might be. So that has to happen from a variety of ways and perspectives. But I think ultimately in the context of school, the onus is back on teachers and school administrators to really make sure that they are having people feel welcome and wanted and invited.
That's good. Sticking with the same vein of questions, specifically to like empower parents, what resources would you put in the hands of fathers right now to kind of increase their engagement or their involvement in schools?
Actually, for fathers, I think it would be all about making connections. So where's your school located? Is it near the Center for Urban Families? Because men tend to talk and to share differently than women, so it's not necessarily go read this, but you know, I did so and so and such and such. These people really helped me out here or there. It's a difference. It is. So I don't necessarily think it's the quote unquote piece of paper or the idea, but it's really helping to make those connections. Like I said in Facebook Live, if you have men who are currently in your building who are present, have them engage and invite and share. So I think it's more along those lines. And to that extent, that there needs to be messaging for mothers as well, because oftentimes the primary caretaker of our children is the mom. So kind of how do we get that information to dad if he isn't already coming in the building? So it's, again, that two-pronged pathway. There are no easy answers and pathways in this process. We have to approach it from multiple ways simultaneously.
Now, traditionally, when you see kind of school frameworks or school classrooms, school sessions happening all across the country, you see parental engagement and involvement heighten at the earlier years and then decrease as kids get older, kind of like a gradual release kind of thing. How do you, A, is that true from a father's standpoint? And then B, how do you keep the engagement or the involvement kind of like robust even as the child gets older?
Again, I think it goes back to something else I said in Facebook Live session, that involvement isn't necessarily just coming to school. Both from a research perspective and from a personal perspective, because I too have a child, it is true that parents engage differently as their children get older. As an African American parent myself, it was very intentional and purposeful that as my child navigated through middle school and high school, that she learned to kind of quote unquote fight her battles herself. If I felt that she couldn't do that and reach a satisfactory solution, then I would come through and navigate, but that was purposeful. So I did not want to be in school. Having done interviews with fathers, because I'm currently interviewing African American fathers of elementary, middle, and high school age children for that very reason, to kind of talk about how it changes between those segments of our school years and process, they too echo a similar sentiment. You want your child to become adult as he or she is getting older. So you don't necessarily want to be physically present. You're engaging in conversation with your child about grades, homework, what comes next in terms of next steps once we're in high school. But I think the key to that is to find out what information parents still need and want to know. College and career ready is a major impetus in schools across the country. So what's that conversation like in regards to financial aid, Pell Grants, paying for school? What is that conversation like in terms of helping to mediate cultural norms? I have a student in my doctoral program right now who is working in a border town in California and has a large population of Mexican students in particular in this particular town. And so having this college and career conversation, the school is interested in having them apply to more I can't think of the term I want right now. Top tier schools, the Harvards, the Stanfords.
Okay.
But for the most part, because of kind of family norms and conditions, they tend to stay local. So they can stay home. So kind of how do you honor that and maybe share information about these other opportunities? So I think those types of conversations are things that parents are more interested in as we move through middle and high school than just the traditional back to school night where teachers talk about, the content in the upcoming year or report card night. And then by all means, we are still interested in doing things that overall support the school in the city, like if there's going to be a beautification project or day, especially if you want to talk about fathers and those who might have that skill set. So it's just a matter of kind of fine tuning it as they get older and shifting to what that child needs in that age range.
I got you. Last but not least, now that we've equipped parents, right? If there are some teachers out there, novice teachers, even seasoned teachers, who are struggling to find just really good resources, rich resources to help with cultural competency or understanding this whole idea of like parental engagement, stuff like that, what would you suggest?
The educator in me says read.
What's that? What's reading?
First and foremost, talk to your colleagues. What are they reading? What might be some PD that they've taken? If there are some who are still in school themselves, either earning a master's or additional certificate, what's a good article, a book that they have read? Just search Amazon for your topic. I think you can find almost anything you want to read off of Amazon. So having said that, I think that's the very generic answer. In particular, I have some suggestions. I think this might be a little awkward.
You brought a library with you, I see.
So we started out our conversation specifically around African American fathers, and at Facebook Live I talked about the National Fatherhood Initiative, and they are located in Maryland, in Gaithersburg, and they put out a variety of resources specifically for fathers, both Black and Latino. This is one called The Guide to Strengthening Fatherhood in Your Community. It is very practical. The subtitle, if you will, is Moving from Inspiration to Implementation. This is the previous version of their Father Facts book that I talked about. There is a more recent version that is available on the website. So father specific. Then in Baltimore and other places, we have a growing Spanish-speaking population of students, as well as a multitude of other ethnicities represented depending on where you are. So if you're kind of the textbook type person, Sonia Nieto does an excellent textbook called Affirming Diversity, and she is a Latina woman herself, so she spends a lot of time talking about kind of bilingualism and ways in which we support Latino students in particular, but all culturally and linguistically diverse students overall. Another one, specifically around the Latino students are involving Latino families in schools, a focus on raising student achievement. If you are very practical oriented, one of my favorite books is actually this, 10 Languages You'll Need in the Classroom. I speak English. I don't speak Spanish or any other language in that broad sense. We could have a conversation about Ave, but that's not what we're talking about. And one of the reasons why I like this book, and it will not have every, it says the most common. We start out with Spanish. And I'm not going to show the entire book as I go through this, but I think it is worth mentioning. We do Vietnamese, Hmong, Cantonese, Korean, Haitian Creole, Arabic, Russian, Tagalog, and Navajo.
Really cool.
So in the sense that there are some basic phrases and words that you can begin to utilize and incorporate, because I have found that just making the small effort can mean a lot to people. I was teaching a class once at the community college, and I had a student in my class who was of a Latino background, and he was a talker. And you know, I am a former teacher, early childhood teacher at that, so proximity, you go stand next to your student. You redirect, thank you for being on task to the entire class. And finally, when none of that was successful, I walked over and very gently whispered in his ear, "Cállate la boca," which is be quiet in Spanish. And he looked at me and he smiled, but he became quiet.
Got you, got you.
And he
That's a quick
raised his
win.
grade
Yeah.
a whole letter.
Oh, nice.
So
nice.
he became much more attuned and attentive, and it's for me saying that one
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
So there is something to be said for making the genuine effort. Depending on where you teach, you may never be able to master the language of all the students and their families who are represented in your classroom, but genuine effort does matter, and it goes a long way for making people feel welcome and inclusive. And again, kind of coming back to fatherhood, and Black fathers in particular, I told you almost all of them tell me one of the reasons you don't see them in schools is because they are not asked. So again, it's extending that invitation of welcome. We're not done.
No, this is good.
I also mentioned Joyce Epstein and her typology of parents and parent involvement, rather, and there's 6 types: the parenting, the communicating, the volunteering, learning at home, decision making, and collaborating with the community. So this is a book she puts out, School, Family, Community Partnerships, Your Handbook for Action. And there are all kinds of ideas and literal templates in this book to help you as a school or as an individual teacher kind of organize. And last but not least, if there are some of you who are thinkers in that you just like to kind of ponder issues, one of my favorite authors, Paulo Freire, and just looking at teachers as cultural workers. Because ultimately what you are doing is helping to navigate your students' world and how they interact with others, and the families are included in that as well. There is a lovely concept in the parental involvement field called family funds of knowledge. And basically it is saying, how do you take what families do well and utilize it to support your instruction? So how can they come in and aid about, you know, whatever your curriculum, your content, your learning is? And I think if we look at families from that perspective, it also helps us to look at how we are diversifying our curriculum, because we might want to explore a topic from a variety of angles and perspectives, and not necessarily the one that's solely in our textbook. And again, I think that is also very apropos to us, our conversation about African American fathers, because I said to some extent, you might get them started with the quote unquote stereotypical things, like coming in for the sports game or to help build something, but the key is not to stop there. That as you build that relationship and that rapport, they can be exposed and extended to other things. I told you, I think, about the workshop that one of the early childhood centers did for dads about how to take care of their daughter's hair. So there's all types of ways that we can go, but you have to start with that initial invitation and think about that comfort and the assets that that parent, that Black father in particular, is already bringing to the school building or the larger school community, and build from there.
It's interesting, as you were talking and as I was looking at the resources, I just kept on thinking about relationship building, relationship building. So that has to be like a key critical component. What do you say to the hesitant or reserved teacher who's just not an extrovert, who just can't get themselves out of the chair to kind of like shake the hand, to give the side hug to a parent? Like, what's the first step that they could take to kind of start building that relationship?
that there's nothing wrong with being an introvert because I'm one. Mm-hmm. You don't want to give everybody a hug, and everybody doesn't want a hug from you.
Words of wisdom.
Well, you've seen a very personal example of that everyone does not want to hug from you. But I think more so, again, I said in the Facebook Live session, this is about children for me and the best outcomes for them.
That's right.
So in so much that as a classroom teacher, ideally you are communicating with your students' families anyway, because you're sharing information about how they learn, what they're doing well, what they might need some additional support with. So just start with those things. The world is changing, so maybe you're using Class Dojo, maybe you're using the online portal. It's not necessarily the face-to-face, but it is the invitation. In my own dissertation research, because I told you Joyce Epstein's is two-way communication, one of the best ways to get information to a parent, and my dissertation was specifically on fathers, was to have the child deliver it. Now, obviously, that is somewhat contingent upon how old the child is and his or her ability to speak. And so I mean kind of a verbal messaging, not necessarily the piece of paper that goes into the knapsack and may never be seen again. But if a child can go home and talk about and encourage and share and potentially ask, that is one of the most effective. The least effective is that like generic note home from the school, if you will. And the next is the teacher asking. So again, is that through an email? Is it through a phone call? Is it through a face-to-face request if and when you're in the building? So it really does come back to, again, that interaction. How do we know each other? That relational invitation.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know that these conversations are constantly ongoing, but we really appreciate you spending another good afternoon with us, right? Thank you so much for these rich resources that you've shared, and we really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure being here. I've enjoyed this.
Awesome.